They tell you time heals all wounds. Your boys say it, your mom says it, every motivational page you've ever followed has said it. Move on, get busy, hit the gym. She wasn't the one anyway. But here you are, months later, maybe years later, and something small happens. A song, a smell, or you drive past that restaurant, and for just a second, it hits you like a freight train. The version of her you believed in. The one you built your whole future around in your head at 2 a.m. when everything felt possible. But why does that still happen? Why does a man's heartbreak work differently, sometimes staying buried for years before resurfacing like something that never left? I've spent months going through research, real accounts from men, and the kind of psychology that most people in this space refuse to talk about honestly. What I found genuinely surprised me, and I'll get to the part that will probably hit the hardest for you personally, because it's the thing nobody warned you about before it was already too late. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly why a man's heartbreak doesn't heal the way people say it does, and more importantly, what's actually happening underneath when you think you're over it. But if you want to skip straight to understanding what she actually wanted, what she was feeling, and whether she was ever really in it with you, the link in the description takes you to my book I put together called The Truth Detector. It's built specifically for moments like this, when the confusion hurts more than the breakup itself. Worth checking out while it's still on your mind. Now, back to the question. Picture this. A man ends a relationship, or it ends for him, which is its own kind of violence. Either way, he does what men are trained to do. He locks it down, he gets disciplined, he posts in the gym, he looks fine on the outside so fast that even the people closest to him assume he's fine on the inside too. But there's a study published by psychologists at Lancaster University that found something uncomfortable about this pattern. Men, compared to women, tend to suppress emotional processing after a breakup rather than work through it. Women, on average, hurt more visibly and more immediately, so they process faster. Men push it down, and so they carry it longer, sometimes for years, sometimes forever. That's not weakness. That's just what happens when you're never given the language or the permission to actually feel it in real time. So the grief doesn't go anywhere, it just goes underground. And underground things have a way of surviving things that should have killed them. But here's what's strange about this though. Most men aren't even grieving the woman. Not really. Think about the last relationship that wrecked you. When you replay it, what do you actually miss? Is it her specifically, or is it the version of yourself that existed in that relationship? The guy who had something to come home to, the guy whose future made sense, the man who was chosen. That's a different kind of loss, and it's a much harder one to name because you can replace a person, but you cannot replace the feeling of being the man someone believed in. There's a concept in psychology called ambiguous loss. It was developed by Dr. Pauline Boss, a family therapist who spent decades studying grief that doesn't have a clean ending. She originally used it to describe families of soldiers who went missing in war, people who couldn't mourn properly because there was no body, no funeral, no moment where the world said, "It's over, you can grieve now." But here's what nobody tells you. A breakup, especially a bad one, creates the exact same psychological condition. She's not dead. You might still see her online. Maybe she's already moved on in a way that's visible and painful. There's no ritual, no closure ceremony. Society doesn't give you bereavement leave for a breakup. You're just supposed to go to work on Monday. So your brain gets stuck in a loop. It was never designed to exit cleanly. It keeps reaching for resolution that doesn't exist. And every time something reminds you of her, that song, that restaurant, that specific quality of Saturday afternoon light, your nervous system fires the same signal it fired the first time you realized something was wrong. Not because you're weak, but because your brain is doing exactly what it was built to do. It's trying to solve an unsolved problem. But the problem is, this one can't be solved. It can only be accepted, and acceptance is the one thing men are least prepared for. But here's where it gets darker, and I need you to sit with this one. Most men don't just lose the relationship, they lose the investment. Think about what you actually put in. Not just time, though that's real, but the version of your future you quietly built around this person. The trips you planned in your head, the way you imagined introducing her to people, the inside jokes that will never make sense to anyone else on the planet, the particular way she laughed at something you said when you were at your most yourself. You built a whole architecture around this person, and when she left, or when you ended it, that entire structure collapsed. Not just the relationship, the meaning you were building inside of it. Dr. Helen Fisher, the anthropologist and neuroscientist who has probably done more brain imaging research on romantic love than anyone alive, found that the same neural pathways activated by love are the ones activated by addiction, specifically the dopamine reward system, the same one that makes cocaine feel good. And what happens when you cut off a dopamine source the brain has become dependent on? Withdrawal. Literal, neurological withdrawal. So when people say, just get over it, they're essentially telling a man in physical withdrawal to just decide to feel fine. That's not how any of this works. Your brain is genuinely struggling. The ache is not a character flaw. It is a chemical process happening inside your skull. But, and this is the part that changes everything, understanding why it hurts doesn't tell you why it lingers, because most men eventually get through the acute phase. The first month, brutal. The second month, survivable. By month 4, most men report feeling functional again. So what is the thing that keeps pulling certain men back, sometimes years later, into a grief they thought they'd already outrun? This is the part I want you to really pay attention to. It's not the loss of her, it's the unfinished story. Your brain is a meaning-making machine. It doesn't just record what happened, it builds a narrative around it. And when a relationship ends badly, without closure, without understanding, without ever really knowing what went wrong, or whether any of it was real, your brain refuses to file it away. It keeps the case open, it keeps running the footage, not because you're obsessed, because cognitively, an unexplained ending is an unsolved problem, and your brain does not like unsolved problems. This is exactly why I put together the truth detector, because the confusion that follows a breakup, the was she ever real with me, was I reading it wrong, was she using me, was I just convenient, that specific torture is what keeps men stuck longer than the heartbreak itself. The link is in the description. If that question is eating at you right now, that's where to go. But back to the open case. Back to the footage your brain keeps running. Here's what makes it worse. Men, specifically, tend to have fewer people they can actually process this with. Research out of the University of Exeter found that men typically have smaller emotional support networks than women and are significantly less likely to seek help after a breakup. So not only is the grief going underground, it's going underground alone. No one is watching, no one is asking, and the silence starts to feel like proof that you should just be over it by now. So you perform being over it, you get good at the performance, and somewhere in the process, you lose track of where the performance ends and where you actually are. That's the trap, and most men never see it coming until they're already in it. Here's something nobody in the self-improvement space wants to say out loud because it doesn't make for a clean motivational post. Some men never fully heal from certain relationships. Not because they're broken, not because they didn't do the work, but because some connections genuinely rewire you, and the rewiring doesn't just undo itself because enough time passed or because you found someone new. That's not a tragedy, that's just the truth. And the truth, even when it's uncomfortable, is always more useful than a lie that makes you feel better for 12 minutes. Think about the men you know, or maybe think about yourself, who got into something new relatively quickly after a painful breakup. Looked fine, seemed to be moving forward, but something was slightly off, a guardedness that wasn't there before. A roof they kept on their emotions that they couldn't fully explain, a habit of expecting abandonment before it happened, of pulling back right when things started to feel real. That's not a personality trait. That's a wound that got covered before it closed. Researchers call this attachment injury. It's what happens when a significant relationship ends in a way that feels like a betrayal. Not necessarily cheating, but any moment where the person you trusted most became the source of your deepest pain. Your attachment system, which is the part of you built to bond with people and feel safe with them, gets recalibrated. It learns a new lesson, and the lesson it learns is closeness is dangerous. So the next time closeness shows up, the system flags it, not consciously. You don't sit down and decide to self-sabotage. It just happens. You get weird about things that shouldn't be a big deal. You fight about something small, and somewhere underneath, that's not really what you're fighting about. You feel suffocated by someone who is genuinely good to you for reasons you can't articulate. That's the ghost of the old relationship living inside the new one. And here's the brutal irony of it. The men who got hurt the worst are often the ones who loved the hardest. They weren't weak. They were fully in. They gave real access to their time, their plans, their unguarded version of themselves. And because they gave all of that, the loss was proportional. You can't lose what you never invested. So the depth of the grief is actually proof of the depth of the man. But nobody frames it that way. Instead, the message men get is, toughen up, move faster, don't catch feelings so hard next time, which is advice that doesn't heal anything. It just teaches men to preemptively withdraw, to stay just far enough away from real connection that they can survive losing it. And that strategy works. Until you're 43 years old wondering why nothing feels like it means anything. I want to tell you something about a guy I know. We'll call him Marcus. Not his real name, but his real story. He ended a 4-year relationship in his late 20s. The woman wasn't right for him. He knew that. The relationship had real problems. He was the one who ended it. So everyone around him assumed he was fine. He assumed he was fine. 3 years later, he's in a new relationship with someone genuinely good, patient, real, actually into him, and he's destroying it, not dramatically, quietly, pulling away at the exact moment she gets close, finding reasons she's not quite right, staying just slightly unavailable so that he never has to find out what happens if he lets someone fully in again. He didn't connect it to the first relationship for a long time because on the surface it looked like he was over it. He never cried about it anymore. He didn't think about her constantly. By every visible measure, he was fine, but the attachment injury was still there, running quietly in the background like a program he never closed. But the moment he finally made the connection, the moment he understood that his behavior in the new relationship was a direct response to what had happened in the old one, something shifted. Not fixed, shifted. That's an important distinction. Understanding why you're doing something doesn't automatically stop you from doing it, but it gives you a fighting chance because you can't correct a pattern you can't see. This is why heartbreak in men isn't just an emotional event. It's a formative one. It changes the architecture of how you move through the world afterward, how much you trust, how much you allow, how much of yourself you're willing to put into someone else's hands. And the men who come out of it well, not perfectly, but well, aren't the ones who got over it fastest. They're the ones who actually looked at it, who sat in the discomfort long enough to understand what it was telling them, who got honest about what they lost and why it mattered instead of performing strength they hadn't actually built yet. That is the work. Uncomfortable, unglamorous, and completely invisible to everyone around you. But it's the only work that actually closes the wound instead of just covering it. By the way, if you're in that place right now where you're trying to figure out whether what you had was even real, whether she was genuinely there or just going through motions, whether you missed signs that were right in front of you, the Truth Detector was built for exactly that. First link in the description. Not a substitute for the inner work, but a starting point for seeing clearly when your own emotions are too loud to think straight, because clarity is what makes the real work possible. So, where does this leave you? Not with a 5-step recovery plan, not with a list of things to do this week that will make the ache go away, because if you've been watching this long, you already know that's not how this works. You've probably already tried the list. You've probably already done the gym, the new haircut, the trip with the boys, the situationship that was supposed to make you feel something different, but mostly just made you feel more alone in a different location. The real question isn't, how do you get over it? The real question is, what do you do with a wound that changed you? And I think the honest answer is this: you stop trying to get back to who you were before it. That man is gone. The relationship happened. It rewired things. Pretending otherwise isn't strength. It's just a longer way of staying stuck. The men who come through heartbreak with something to show for it aren't the ones who erased it fastest. They're the ones who let it mean something, who looked at the wreckage and asked, not why did she do this, but what did I learn about myself in that relationship that I couldn't have learned any other way? That's a harder question. It requires you to look at your own patterns, your own contributions, the places where you showed up fully and the places where you quietly checked out before she did. It requires a kind of honesty that most people, men and women both, spend their whole lives avoiding. But here's what's on the other side of that honesty. Not a softer man, not someone who processed his feelings and became less. A man who actually knows himself, who knows his own limits and his own capacity, who can walk into something new without dragging the ghost of the last thing behind him, who can be close to someone without the alarm going off every time it starts to feel real. That man is more dangerous, in the best possible sense, than the version of you that was just performing being okay. Now, there's one more thing I want to leave you with, and this one is going to sound strange at first. The fact that it still hurts, even a little, even now, is not a sign that something went wrong with you. It's a sign that something went right. You were present enough to be affected. You cared enough to be changed. In a world full of men who have emotionally checked out of everything because it's safer that way, the fact that you felt it means you were actually there. The goal is not to become a man who can't be hurt. That man can't be loved either. The goal is to become a man who can be hurt and who chooses to stay open anyway. Not naive, not reckless, but open, because that is where everything real lives. Protecting yourself from pain by closing off is like refusing to go outside because it might rain. Technically it works, but you also never feel the sun. The healing isn't about getting back to zero. It's about building something new on top of what the loss taught you. A version of yourself that is more honest, more self-aware, and less willing to abandon his own standard just to keep someone around who was never going to stay. That last part matters more than people realize. One of the quietest ways heartbreak damages men is by making them lower their bar. They get so desperate to not feel that specific loneliness again that they start accepting less honesty, less effort, less reciprocity, just to have something, just to not be alone with the grief. And that is where the truth detector genuinely earns its place. Not as a shortcut, but as a tool for moments when you're not sure if what you're accepting is real or if you're just too tired to question it anymore. First link in the description. It's there when you need it. But the deeper truth, the one I want you to carry out of this video, is that your healing is not on her timeline. It's not on anyone else's schedule. And it doesn't have to look like what people expect it to look like. You don't have to be over it to be okay. You just have to be honest about where you actually are. That honesty, more than any tactic or strategy or recovery plan, is what eventually sets you free. Not free from feeling things. Free from being controlled by feelings you never properly faced. One last thing, and I mean this, the man you become after real loss, if you do the work instead of the performance, is the most attractive version of yourself that will ever exist. Not because women find trauma interesting, but because a man who has been through something real and came out of it with his integrity intact has a kind of gravity that cannot be manufactured. You don't get her back by waiting. You get her back by becoming the kind of man you never needed her to complete. But if you like this video, then YouTube thinks you'll like this one too. So click on it and I'll see you there.